We talked to the students in the first week back in September about the story of Charlotte Worthington, who was the BMX gold medalist in Tokyo, and we showed them some video clips of her winning. And what was most important really is we showed her run where she tried to perform that 360-degree backflip in competition that you can see on the screen there, and we showed her first run up at it where she completely failed and fell off. You then were shown, we showed in that assembly the US competitor who was the favourite going into the competition, and we showed her BMX ride and all of the tricks that she performed, and she absolutely nailed it and got a really high mark. She got 96 out of 100, and there was the jubilance amongst the US team and amongst that athlete herself, absolutely certain that she had secured the gold medal. We then showed Charlotte Worthington's second run, and we paused at that point and discussed what might have been going through Charlotte Worthington's mind, indeed what she's gone on record as saying as to what went through her mind. Namely, I know that I can do that 360 backflip, I know that I've rehearsed it, I know that I can do it. I'm not thinking about going for gold or going for silver or going for bronze, I'm just thinking about what I know that I can do. And she went and she did it, and as you can see there with the picture, she got that gold medal. She could have, as the commentators in the clip that we showed, she could have settled for just going for silver, just going for bronze and taking out that amazing 360-degree backflip. But she knew that she could do it. She wanted to take the risk. She wanted that all or nothing approach, and it absolutely paid off. On the 19th of September, Charlotte Worthington put out a tweet that was talking about the things that had gone behind her winning that gold medal. And as you can see on the slide, she talked about the fact that there was a mountain of failures behind her actual success. And it was that resonated. That's why that story resonated so strongly with us as a school, because we felt it so perfectly encapsulated the approach to learning that we want to engender in all of our students. That recognition that every success, behind every success are, as she puts it, a mountain of failures, and that we should embrace failure as something to learn from rather than be worried about. We should absolutely want to go to achieve our complete full potential, our total best, rather than just going for second best or third best because we're afraid of failure. So Charlotte Worthington was really clear about the goal that she was aiming for. She wanted that gold medal in that new event. That's why she gave up her career as a chef to put everything into training for that BMX competition in the Olympics. And students at our school will be aware that we've introduced in September in every lesson being really explicit with our students about sharing with them our learning intentions and the success criteria, and linking feedback to those two things. And why are we doing that? Because that is how we will get our students to achieve your goals. So back in February 2020, we started to ask our students through an assembly during lockdown, and we sent out a link afterwards for them to complete surveys. And we were interested in looking at some of the attitudes to learning of our young people. We also asked our staff very similar questions, and I just want to talk about 4 of those statements that you can see on the screen in front of you. The first row of statements, you can see that 53% of our students either agreed or strongly agreed that they do in fact regularly ask the teachers about what they can be doing next, and teachers by and large agreed in similar proportions. It's great that there was that agreement, but clearly there was a huge room for improvement there if that's only happening around 50% of the time. The next 2 rows down perhaps seem a little bit more positive, that both staff and students strongly agreed that students at our school do know what to do if they're stuck and they don't know what to do next. And similarly, that students at our school do know how to judge when they've been successful in their learning. And at first sight, that seemed really positive, that there was that commonality of opinion from the students and from the staff. That next one down, that final one on the screen there, gave us cause to pause and reflect a little bit further. Only 41% of our staff really felt that our students as a whole saw mistakes as an opportunity to learn, whereas the students themselves, that was a far higher rate of return. Almost 90% of them were saying that they did in fact see mistakes as an opportunity to learn. And that gave us a desire to dig a little deeper into the reasons behind the percentage of people from the student population that were answering in the way that they were. So we met with a range of students to ask them face to face in small groups why they might have answered in the way that they did. And we found some really interesting things, because what we found was that students do, in fact, the ones we asked, they do know what to do if they're stuck in lessons, and that answer is they ask their teacher. They do know how to judge when they've been successful in their learning. Sometimes in lessons like maths and modern languages, the answers are there and they can literally mark them and see whether they're right or wrong. But in some other subject areas, their answers were, I ask my teacher and my teacher will tell me whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. And even with that, mistakes are an opportunity for me to learn. When we spoke to members of staff, they more regularly said that they wanted the students to get to grips and be active in their own learning and work out when they'd gone wrong. And what the students meant in their answer is, if they made a mistake, it was okay. The teacher would tell them why it was wrong and how to fix it. So this has led us to reflect as a school about some of the issues about some of those responses. And the best analogy that I can come up with is the curse of the sat-nav. Now I can remember in terms of when sat-navs first came in, and I had one in my car and I programmed in where I was going. It was a seaside holiday and I was in the car with myself, my 2 children in the back, going to meet my mum in a coastal town in Wales, and I programmed in to the sat-nav where we were going, and I duly followed from Sheffield to Wales all of the instructions that the sat-nav gave me. I had a mild sense of kind of niggling concern as the sat-nav was telling me that I was very close to the end of my destination and I still couldn't see the sea, and in fact I was going up a hill. And yet I ignored those little bits of niggles and put all of my trust in the sat-nav. And lo and behold, we got to that point that we all dread when we're using a sat-nav that said you have reached your destination, and you look out of the window and you can see that you patently have not. What's that got to do with learning? Well, what that made us reflect about, that survey that we did and that analogy that I've just talked about there, is our approach of too many of our students to learning too much like my over-reliance on sat-nav. Again, if I think about other of my own shortcomings with the sat-nav, sometimes I can program something in and I'll look at the steps that the sat-nav wants to take me on and I think, do you know what, there's a shorter way. I don't need to rely on that sat-nav quite so blindly. There's a different way that might get me there a little bit faster. So the reason that we've introduced learning intentions and success criteria this academic year in all of our subjects is to try to have a common approach as a staff body to develop our students as more active learners. The learning intentions are to share with those students explicitly, this is where we are intending to go. And the success criteria about how we will get there, so that the staff members can target those feedbacks, whether that's verbal feedback, written feedback, reformulating the lesson a little bit, linked to the success criteria. And really importantly, from the student point of view, that the students can use those success criteria to judge themselves, to see when they've learned, when they've achieved what the teacher intended, to use them as they get more sophisticated in their use of them, to correct their own course. To use them at the start in conjunction with the teacher finding this out with them about, do I need to go through all of these steps, or could I have a starter point that's later so that I can deepen my understanding in a particular area, freeing perhaps the teacher up to support those students who need more support at the start of that journey. And so What we will find in our lessons is that every lesson the teachers are sharing learning intentions and success criteria explicitly with our students right now, and that as we take that learning journey ourselves as members of staff and the students during the course of the year, we will get better and better at guiding those students to guide themselves using their success criteria and to take a more active part in their learning. And what we'd encourage parents and carers to be doing is to be, when the child gets home at the end of the day, to not ask them what did you do today, but what did you learn today, and how were you able to judge whether or not you've been successful. Interestingly, another set of the questions that we asked that had quite a big discrepancy was the one that you can see on your screen there, that teachers strongly agreed that they give regular feedback to their students about their learning 95% of the time. There's still room for improvement there in terms of we want that to be 100%, but that also shows you the level of honesty of those surveys being answered. But that the students only said that was true 68% of the time. Now, as it says on the screen there, why is there such a big difference, such a big discrepancy between those two figures? Are our teachers lying? Are our students lying? Well, actually, again, when we dug under that a little bit more and talked to our students about what they constituted as feedback, what we saw is that actually there is not the same shared definition of feedback. So very simply, our definition of feedback is anything at all that closes a gap in learning. Finding out what those gaps are, and anything at all that the teacher is doing or that is encouraging the students to use the success criteria to do themselves to try to close that gap. In terms of writing, in previous years, we've done what the students and staff sometimes as a shorthand called gap marking, looking at what was good, giving it a score in some way, shape or form, which is the A, achievement, and P for progress. What do you need to do to progress? And we want to simplify that, because actually the attainment score as you're going through your learning journey is probably the least important thing. It's finding out what went well and what do the students need to do that's even better if. Again, staff doing that with students more and more using the success criteria to work that out for themselves, and to also use those success criteria when they find out what their gaps are, what their areas are that they're not certain about, where they can't work that out for themselves, making sure that they're sharing that with their teachers, bringing that to their attention. And a lot of our pedagogical focus this academic year is how teachers get better and better at building on the strengths that are already there, to finding out more and more and with more frequency where those gaps are, and putting steps into place to encourage the students to close those gaps in learning. We also found, talking to the students, that their definition of feedback was very, very simple. It is when my teacher writes on some work that I have done and tells me something in writing. And that is one very valid way of giving feedback. It's not the only way, and in fact, it's probably in many scenarios the least useful of ways. If a piece of work has been done and it's been done and there's an awful lot that's been written, it can be useful that the teacher takes that away and reads it and considers it and writes some feedback and has a lesson where it's allowing the student to actually do something with that feedback. But there's no immediacy there. That is written feedback, therefore, is not the only way in which teachers are giving feedback to students. But it is one of the ways that, in fact, for some students, it was the only thing that they themselves are recognising as feedback. The most powerful form of feedback is feedback that is immediate, that is live, and that is far more likely to be verbal in the classroom. It's why last year, as part of that response to trying to plug those gaps as a result of the pandemic, we issued all of our students with mini whiteboards that for our students in year 8, 9, 10 and 11, we really strongly encourage you to be bringing those in every single lesson, because feedback is a two-way process. Feedback from the students to the staff is crucial for the staff to see, I've taught this, what do the students understand? Where are their misconceptions? And using those whiteboards is a very, very quick, very powerful way, as you can see in the example there, to show that to the member of staff, rather than just relying on 4, 5, 6 people to be putting their hand up. That shows you everybody's point of view. So verbal live feedback can take a range of forms. One is the use of whiteboards, telling the students whether they've got the answer right or not, picking on where the errors are and the misconceptions straight away. Another is to use the success criteria to get the students to peer and self-assess, and then the teachers validating that by looking over the shoulder, seeing what they've done within class. Feedback too is where the teachers might well have taken the work in to reflect on, or reflected on a performance in the lesson and considered some of the common things that have gone wrong across the class, and then setting up the starter in the following lesson to be able to deal with those gaps in learning that had been noticed. In other words, written feedback is really valid, but it is not the only form of feedback. That verbal live feedback in the classroom is equally and sometimes of more validity because of its immediacy. So students themselves, what we would encourage you how to get the most from feedback, all of the things that you've got on there. Recognise all types of feedback as being that, an action that your teacher is doing with you to close a gap in learning. Actively use the success criteria to be analysing your own work, judging your own performance, see where you need to go next. Use your mini whiteboards and pens. Remember, if you're in year 8 to year 11, then you have got those that we supplied last year, but your teachers, particularly those students in year 7, your teachers have got sets of those in their classrooms too, but it would be great to have as a piece of your own equipment. Where you are responding to feedback and that's in written form, which it isn't always, not all of our subjects have writing as their key medium, but where they do, use your green pen, because then, as Mrs. Bott says to her classes, it's like a flashing neon light to yourself when you're looking back in your books. This was something that I improved. I can see the tangible results of my improvement. And however that feedback is given to you, to act on it, to celebrate what went well, to look at how we get even better, what's our even better ifs. And of course, to ask for it. Yes, you can ask your teacher, you can ask yourself using the success criteria, you can ask your peers. And why would we do all of that? Well, to take it right back to Charlotte Worthington, nobody learns without getting it wrong. If our students came into school knowing everything that they are going to know when they leave us in year 11, there'd be no point in those intervening 5 years. And in order to create great things, you've got to get things wrong and learn from those things. And that's why acting on that feedback, seeking it out, using those success criteria can be so incredibly powerful.